I never thought my life would come crashing down in a single second. One moment, I was working on the roof, hammer in hand, sweat dripping down my brow. The next, I was lying on the ground, staring at the sky, unable to feel my legs. The doctors said I was lucky to be alive. A spinal cord injury. Paraplegia. Fancy words that didn't change the fact that I was trapped inside my own body. My wife, Lisa, held my hand in the hospital, her blue eyes filled with tears. "We'll get through this," she whispered. "I promise." But promises are fragile things. Chapter 2. The neighbor, then there was him. Our neighbor Dan, a man I'd always despised. He was the kind of guy who never cut his grass, drank too much, and looked at Lisa a little too long when he thought I wasn't watching. He had a smug smirk, like the world owed him something, and suddenly he was everywhere. At first, I thought Lisa was just being kind. She needed help now that I couldn't do anything. Dan mowed our lawn. He brought groceries, fixed the car. I should have been grateful. But I wasn't. Because when Lisa smiled at him, it was different. It wasn't the way a wife should smile at a neighbor. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself I was being insecure. Until the night I heard them. Chapter 3. The betrayal. He was in bed, the bedroom door slightly open. The house was quiet, too quiet. Then a sound, a whisper, a giggle, and then a moan. At first, I thought I was imagining things, my mind playing tricks. But no, it was real. The soft creak of the couch, the breathy gasps, the unmistakable sound of betrayal happening just beyond my reach. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I could only listen as my wife, my Lisa, let another man take what was mine. Something inside me broke that night. Not my body, my soul. Chapter 4. The game begins. I didn't confront her, not yet. Confrontation was for men who could stand on their own 2 feet. No, I had to be smarter. I had to be patient. I started watching, listening, waiting. Lisa thought I was helpless, but she underestimated me. She left her phone lying around, and I had time. So much time. I learned to navigate the voice commands. I read their messages. I saw the photos. My wife in our bed, with him. They thought they were untouchable, but they didn't know I had nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is dangerous. Chapter 5. The trap eye started dropping hints. A misplaced word. A lingering stare. Lisa grew nervous. Dan started looking at me differently. Like maybe he knew I knew. Good. Then I sent them a text. Lisa got a message from my phone one evening while she was in the kitchen. Her face went pale. She turned to me, stammering. "What? What is this?" she asked. I just smiled. The message read, "I know everything. Meet me in the garage at midnight if you want to fix this." She thought I sent it. But I didn't. The smart home system did. I had programmed it earlier that day. Midnight came. Lisa tiptoed to the garage. I watched from the security camera as she met Dan there. They whispered, panicked. They thought they had a chance to silence me. But I wasn't the one they needed to fear. Chapter 6. The Unexpected. Turn as they stood there discussing what to do. The garage door suddenly slammed shut. The power cut out, and then they saw him, not me, someone else. A shadow in the corner, a figure neither of them expected. Lisa gasped. Dan stumbled back. "What the hell?" Before he could finish, the figure stepped into the dim light. It was her, Dan's wife, the woman he had abandoned months ago, the woman he had lied to, the woman who had been watching, just like me, and she was holding a gun. Chapter 7. The final move. "What are you doing?" Lisa whispered. Dan's wife smiled, a slow, knowing smile. "Making things right," she said. The gun went off. Dan collapsed, blood pooling on the garage floor. Lisa screamed, "And I?" I just watched. When the police arrived, the story was simple. Dan's wife had found out about the affair. She snapped. And me? I was just the poor, paralyzed husband, the helpless man who had nothing to do with any of it. The perfect alibi. Lisa cried at my bedside for weeks, guilt-ridden, broken. She begged for forgiveness. I just stroked her hair and whispered, "We'll get through this. I promise." And this time I meant it, because now she was trapped just like me, the end. Lisa never left my side after that night. She cooked, cleaned, cared for me like the perfect wife she had once pretended to be. But now, there was something else in her eyes. A ghost of fear. She had gotten away with it. That's what she thought. Dan's wife had taken the fall. The police never looked at Lisa, not once. But she knew the truth. And worse, she knew I knew. Every night she lay beside me in bed thinking I was asleep. But I wasn't. I could feel her body tremble, hear her breathing change. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop. She didn't understand. It had already dropped. Chapter 9. The Whispering Walls. The house became a prison, not for me, but for her. She started hearing things. Late at night. A knock on the window, a whisper in the dark, a voice on the baby monitor we never used. "Lisa, I know." She checked her phone constantly, terrified of seeing a message that wasn't there. She avoided the garage like it was cursed ground. And I just watched. Helpless husband, silent witness. Monster in plain sight. Chapter 10. The letter. Then came the letter. Slipped under the front door one rainy evening. Lisa saw it first. She picked it up with shaking hands, looking over at me in my wheelchair as if I had somehow done it. She opened it, read it, went pale. "I already knew what it said. I know what you did. I'm watching." No name, no signature, just fear wrapped in an envelope. Lisa turned the house upside down, looking for hidden cameras, searching for some phantom enemy. She checked Dan's wife's social media, still in prison. No way she could have sent it. And yet, someone knew. Lisa stopped sleeping after that, and I never slept better. Chapter 11. The descent days turned into weeks. Lisa lost weight, stopped smiling, jumped at every sound, and then she started talking to him. I'd wake up to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, whispering to no one. "I didn't want to. I had no choice. You understand, don't you?" She was breaking, crumbling under the weight of her sins, exactly as I planned. Chapter 12. "The confession one stormy night," she snapped. She sat across from me at the dinner table, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I have to tell someone. I have to confess." I stared at her. Let the silence stretch. Then I tilted my head. "Confess to what?" Lisa's mouth opened, closed. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. You already know," she said. "Don't you?" I smiled. "I've always known, Lisa." Her hands flew to her mouth. A sob tore from her throat. "I can't live like this." "Then don't." She blinked at me, confused, and that's when I gave her the final push. Chapter 13. The End Game. That night, Lisa took too many pills. The paramedics arrived too late. The police ruled it a suicide. Guilt over Dan. over everything. A broken woman who couldn't live with herself. And me? I was the grieving husband, the victim who had lost everything. No one suspected a thing. Epilogue. Freedom Lisa was buried next to Dan. Fitting in a way, and I moved on. Slowly, carefully. Rehabilitation, physical therapy, progress. And then one day I stood. The doctors called it a miracle, a medical anomaly. But I knew the truth. I had never been as helpless as they thought. I had simply been patient, and now I was free. The end. Freedom tasted sweeter than I had ever imagined. The world had seen me as a man trapped in his own body, a victim of fate and betrayal. But in truth, I had orchestrated everything. Lisa and Dan had written their own deaths the moment they betrayed me. I had simply turned the pages, and now I was walking again. Not perfectly, not without pain, but step by step, I reclaimed what had been stolen from me. I sold the house. Too many ghosts, too many whispers. I moved to a quiet coastal town where no one knew my name. To them, I was just a man who had suffered loss and come out the other side. But the past never stays buried. Chapter 15. The message, it started with a simple envelope. No return address, just my name, scrawled in sharp black ink. Inside, a single note. I know what you did, I laughed. Actually laughed. Was this supposed, to scare me? Whoever sent it clearly didn't understand. I had already won. Still, I played along. I checked my new home for hidden cameras. Nothing. I searched for signs of someone watching me. No one. So I waited, and the next letter came. This one was worse. Inside was a photograph, a picture of my old house. But it wasn't how I left it. The garage door was open, just a crack, and inside, standing in the darkness, was a figure, a woman, Lisa, except Lisa was dead. Chapter 16. Shadows of the past, I burned the letter. Shredded the photo. Told myself it was a sick joke. But the letters kept coming. You thought it was over? Justice is coming. I see you. I barely slept. I started seeing her in my dreams. Lisa, standing at the foot of my bed, her once beautiful, face pale, eyes hollow. You did this, she whispered. You made me do this. And then I'd wake up, drenched in sweat. I told myself it was guilt, but I didn't believe that, because I didn't feel guilty. I felt hunted. Chapter 17. The Stranger. Then, one evening, I saw him, a man sitting at a cafe across the street from my house. Sunglasses, a newspaper he never turned the pages of. He didn't belong here, and he was watching me. I tested him, went for a walk, took turns down unfamiliar streets. He followed, never too close, never too obvious. I could have confronted him, could have asked who he was, but I already knew. Someone was finally asking the right questions. Someone wasn't buying the story. Chapter 18. The investigation. I started digging. If someone was after me, I needed to know who. I searched for news about Lisa, about Dan. Their case was closed. The official story held. But then I found something chilling. Dan's wife. She had escaped from prison, vanished into thin air, and suddenly, I wasn't so sure the letters were a joke anymore. Chapter 19. The Reckoning. That night, my house was too quiet. Every creak of the walls, every rustle of the wind, it all felt wrong. And then, the knock at the door. Slow, deliberate. I didn't answer. My heart pounded in my chest. Another knock, and then a voice. Feminine, soft, but filled with something. Dark. You thought you were free? I reached for the gun I kept by my bed. My hands trembled, not from fear but from something worse. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't in control anymore. I stepped toward the door, slowly, carefully, and as I reached for the handle, the lights went out. To be continued. The power was gone. The house plunged into absolute darkness. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I didn't move, not yet. The gun in my hand felt small, useless against the unknown waiting outside. Then, footsteps, slow, deliberate, inside the house. Gripped the gun tighter. I had locked every door, every window. But someone was here. Then came the whisper. You thought it was over. A woman's voice, but not Lisa's. Dan's wife. Chapter 21. The Ghost That Wouldn't Die. I pivoted toward the sound, moving carefully through the darkness. A shape flickered in the hallway, a shadow among shadows. "Show yourself," I called out. My voice was steady, my grip sure, a low chuckle. Then light. A single candle flickered on the kitchen counter. And in its dim glow I saw her. Rachel, Dan's wife. The woman who had taken the fall for the crime. Only she wasn't the same woman I remembered. Her once polished appearance was gone. Her blonde hair hung in messy tangles. Her face was gaunt, her eyes hollow, yet burning with something primal. Hatred. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "You're supposed to be in prison," I replied. She tilted her head. "And Lisa's supposed to be alive. Guess life's full of surprises." Chapter 22. The Truth That Cuts. Deep I kept the gun trained on her, but Rachel didn't flinch. "You killed her," she said, stepping forward. "Didn't you?" I didn't answer. She smirked. "You might have fooled the cops, but you didn't fool me. Lisa was weak, but she wasn't suicidal, and you were always the smartest one in the room, weren't you?" I shrugged. "I don't know what you're talking about." Liar. Her voice hardened. "You think I don't recognize revenge when I see it? I was married to a cheating bastard too, but I didn't make him pay. Not really. I lost everything. My freedom, my life." She stepped closer, and for the first time I noticed something in her hand. A flash drive. "I have proof," she said. My stomach tightened. "Proof of what?" Rachel smiled, slow and wicked. "That you're not the victim, that you planned everything, that you set Lisa up." Chapter 23. The hunter becomes the hunted. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward, gun raised, but Rachel was faster. She knocked the candle over as she darted back into the darkness. The flame hissed out, swallowing the room in black once more. I turned, listening, heart pounding, a door slammed. She was gone. Chapter 24. A game of cat and mouse. Rachel had outplayed me. She had something real, evidence. And if she had been smart enough to fake her own escape, she was smart enough to have backup plans. I needed to find her. Fast. I checked every possible lead. Old friends, abandoned houses, even the motel Dan used to take Lisa to. Nothing. Then another letter arrived, but this one wasn't like the others. It was an invitation. "Meet me where it all began. Midnight. Come alone." The address? My old house. Chapter 25. The Final Move. I arrived at the house just before midnight. It had been abandoned since I sold it, yet it looked different. The garage door was open, just like in the photo she had sent me. She was waiting inside. Rachel stood near the workbench, laptop open, a single lamp casting harsh light across the room. The flash drive dangled between her fingers. "Glad you could make it," she said. I didn't lower the gun. "You're making a mistake." "No," she said. "You did. You let me live." She inserted the flash drive into the laptop, the screen illuminating. A series of documents, messages, security footage of me deleting texts. erasing evidence, smiling when Lisa broke down. You recorded me, I said. Lisa did, Rachel corrected. Guess she wasn't as blind as you thought. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Fear. Chapter 26. The choice. Rachel tilted her head. You have two options, she said. 1. I send this to the police. They dig deeper, and eventually, they find what they need. I tightened my grip on the gun. And 2, she smirked. You fix this. I frowned. Fix what? Rachel took a step closer, eyes locked onto mine. I lost everything, she whispered. Because of you, because of Dan. I spent months rotting in a cell while you walked free. She leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. So, if I can't get my old life back, I want yours. I stared at her. You want, what, money? She shook her head. I want your identity, your home, your freedom. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. Rachel just smiled. Think about it. You disappear. Vanish. You have the money, the skills. You can start over somewhere far away. She lifted the flash drive. Or you stay, and I make sure you don't have a choice. I hesitated. She had backed me into a corner, and we both knew. Could I kill her? Of course. But Rachel was smart. If she had come this far, she had fail-safes. Killing her wouldn't solve my problem. I had to be smarter. I had to do what I did best. Survive. Chapter 27. The deal with the devil. I lowered the gun. Fine, I said. You win. Rachel grinned. Smart choice. Rachel thought she had me. She thought she had won. She had no idea. I spent the next week dismantling my life. I sold my car, liquidated my assets, and withdrew every last cent I had. The world thought I was preparing to disappear. Rachel believed. It too. She moved into my house, wore my clothes, took over my accounts. She became me. But Rachel had underestimated the one thing that had kept me alive all these years. I was patient, and I never left loose ends. Chapter 29. A whisper in the dark. I watched her from the shadows. She had changed my passwords, cut me off. From my own accounts, erased my presence like I had never existed. It was perfect, because now when she disappeared, no one would come looking. I left the first message on the bathroom mirror, written in the condensation after she showered. I know what you did. She laughed it off. But I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. The second message was on her phone. A note she swore she hadn't typed. You took my life. Now I'm taking it back. She changed the locks, got security cameras, started sleeping with a gun under her pillow. It didn't help, because I was already inside. Chapter 30. The unraveling. Rachel began to break. She heard knocks at the window in the middle of the night. Whispers from the baby monitor she never used. She saw shadows where there were none. Her paranoia became obsession. She barely left the house. She stopped eating, sleeping. And then, one night, she called the police. He's here, she whispered frantically. I know he is. The officers checked the house. Every room, every corner. They found nothing, because I was never inside, not physically, but in her mind, I was everywhere. Chapter 31. The final stroke, Rachel. Was unraveling faster than I expected. She was spiraling toward the inevitable conclusion. She thought she had won, but I had left her only one way out, and she was about to take it. I left the last note on her pillow, written in the same handwriting as the old letters. Justice is coming. That night, Rachel turned on every light in the house. She paced the rooms, gun in hand. And then, she snapped. She ran outside, screaming into the darkness. Where are you? Her shouts woke the neighbors. Lights flickered on. People watched as Rachel screamed about ghosts, about revenge, about a man who didn't exist anymore. And then she fired the gun. Once, twice, at nothing. When the police arrived, they found her on the front lawn, gun shaking in her hands, eyes wild. She told them everything. Told them I was haunting her, that I was alive, that I was coming for her. But to them, she wasn't Rachel. She was me. And I was a man who had lost his mind. Chapter 32. A Fitting End. They took her away that night. Handcuffs, psychiatric evaluation, a mental break. She had stolen my identity. But with it, she had inherited the ghosts I had created. Now, she was the one who had gone insane. She was the one who had become a danger to herself and others. And when the dust settled, they committed her. Rachel, now living as me, was locked away in a psychiatric ward. And the real me? I was free. Epilogue. The man who never was. No one looked for me. No one suspected a thing, because in the world's eyes, I was already gone. Moved to another city. Another name. Another life. And Rachel? She rotted away in a place where no one listened to the screams of the guilty. I had played the game, and I had won. For good this time. The end. I should have been satisfied. I had outplayed them all. Lisa, Dan, Rachel. Every loose end was tied up, but something lingered. A shadow I couldn't shake. It wasn't guilt. It was something far worse. I had spent so long manipulating, plotting, surviving. And now, for the first time, I had no one left to fight. No more betrayals to avenge. No more enemies to destroy, and I hated it. Chapter 34. A New Name, a New Face. I settled into my new identity, a small apartment, a quiet job, a forgettable existence. I became what I had never been before, ordinary, and I loathed every second of it. I watched people, studied them, the way they lied, the way they cheated, the way they thought no one was watching. They were just like Lisa, just like Dan, just like Rachel. I realized something then. It wasn't just them. It was everyone. Chapter. A dangerous curiosity. One night, I followed a man home. I didn't know why. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was habit. Or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I was still the smartest one in the room. He was cheating on his wife. I saw it in the way he hesitated before entering his apartment, the way he erased messages from his phone, the way he carried guilt in his eyes but not in his actions. I followed him for weeks, and then I left him a note. I know what you did. I didn't need to do anything else. Within a month, his marriage was in ruins. His life crumbled. And it felt good. Chapter 36. A New Game. I started small. Anonymous messages, cryptic warnings, tiny pushes in the right direction, and every time I watched people unravel. A boss who was skimming money from the company. A husband hiding an affair. A woman faking an illness for sympathy. All of them, exposed with just a few well-placed whispers. I wasn't ruining lives. I was correcting them. Chapter 37. The Unexpected. Letter. Then one day I received a letter. No. Return address. Just my name. Inside, only 2 words. I see you. I smiled. Finally, someone was playing my game. To be continued. I stared at the letter. Just 2 words, written in precise, careful handwriting. I see you. It was almost poetic. I had spent so long watching others, pulling strings, controlling every outcome. Now, someone was watching me. But who? Rachel was locked away, consumed by the identity I had left her. Dan and Lisa were long dead. I had erased every trace of my old life. This wasn't random. Whoever wrote this knew, and they wanted me to know they knew. Chapter 39. A Game of Shadows I Didn't. Panic. I had spent too many years thinking 10 steps ahead. If someone was hunting me, I needed to hunt them first. I checked the envelope. No fingerprints, no DNA. Whoever sent it was careful. I went back to my usual routines. Work, gym, coffee shops, acting. Normal. But now, I was looking for patterns. And then I saw her. A woman, late 30s. Brown hair, always in a tight ponytail. She was too casual, too controlled. She sat at the same cafe where I had my morning coffee. She accidentally bumped into me outside a bookstore. I followed her. She led me straight to a government building. FBI. Chapter 40. The agent. I let her make the first move. The next morning, as I left my apartment, she was waiting. "Good morning," she said, smiling like we were old friends. I tilted my head. "Do I know you?" She pulled out a badge. "Special Agent Vivian Carter, FBI." I kept my expression neutral. "What does the FBI want with me?" Her smile never wavered. "Oh, I think you know." She handed me a file. Inside were photos of me. Different cities, different names, years' worth of movements. "You're a hard man to track," she said, "but not impossible." I met her gaze. "If you had something on me, I'd already be in cuffs," she chuckled. "Maybe. But I think you and I both know that what you do isn't about evidence, is it? It's about secrets, about whispers in the dark." I leaned in slightly. "What do you want?" "Agent." Carter's smile faded. "There's someone I need you to take down." Chapter 41. A deal with the devil. I laughed. "You're asking me to commit a crime for you?" "Not a crime," she said. "Justice." She slid another file across the table. Inside was a name, a face, a man who looked powerful, wealthy, dangerous. "Aiden Cross," she said. "CEO, philanthropist, untouchable." I raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think I care about him?" Her eyes darkened. "Because he's worse than anything you've ever encountered. He destroys people, and the law can't touch him." I studied the file. Financial crimes, bribery, ties to disappearances. It was intriguing. I closed the folder. "And if I say no, Agent?" Carter leaned in, her voice a whisper. "Then I hand over everything I have on you, and you start running again." I met her gaze. For the first time in a long time. I felt alive. I smirked. "Tell me more about Aiden Cross." To be continued. Aiden Cross. The name alone carried weight. His file was thick, filled with accusations. Money laundering, blackmail, disappearances. But nothing stuck. Men like him didn't make mistakes. But I had brought down untouchable people before. And I was about to do it again. Agent Carter watched me, waiting for my answer. I smirked. "Let's make something clear. You're not in control here. If I do this, I do it my way." She nodded. "Fine, but you get one shot. If you screw this up, you disappear. For real this time." I leaned back. "Then let's begin." Chapter 43. The Ghost Steps into the Light. I spent weeks learning everything about Aiden Cross. His habits, his weaknesses. He was careful. Never personally involved in anything illegal. But power breeds arrogance, and arrogance breeds blind spots. His biggest one? A woman, not his wife, his mistress. Chapter 44. The Queen on the Chessboard. Her name was Isabella Laurent. Young, beautiful, dangerously smart, and she was hiding something. I followed her, watched her movements. And then one night, I left her a note. I know what he did to your sister. The reaction was instant. A frantic call to an unknown number. A sudden change in her routine. I had her attention. The next night I sat at a bar waiting. She approached cautiously. "Who are you?" she asked. I smiled. "A friend." Her fingers tightened around her glass. "You don't know anything." I leaned in. "Aiden killed her, didn't he? And you've been waiting for the right moment to take him down." Her breath hitched. That was all the confirmation I needed. "I can help you," I said, "but you have to trust me." She hesitated, then nodded. The game had begun. Chapter 45. The Fall. Of a King Aiden Cross was a master of control, so I made sure he lost it. A leaked email here, a fabricated accusation there, tiny fractures in his perfect empire. He started lashing out, making mistakes. And then Isabella played her part. One whispered confession to a journalist, one hidden recording, and just like that, the dominoes fell. Chapter 46. Checkmate. The headlines exploded. Corruption scandal. Aiden Cross under investigation. Whistleblower exposes billionaire's crimes. Isabella Laurent, the woman who brought him down. Aiden tried to fight it, tried to silence the truth, but it was too late. One morning, he was escorted out of his office in handcuffs, and just like that, he was finished. Chapter 47. The final conversation. Agent Carter met me in a quiet cafe. She slid a USB drive across the table. "Everything I had on you," she said. "Deleted." I pocketed it. "And Isabella?" "New identity, new life," she smirked. "Not everyone gets that luxury." I leaned back. "What now?" She studied me. "That's up to you." I smirked. "Then I guess I'll see you around, Agent Carter." I walked away, and for the first time in a long time, I was truly free. The end. Freedom. I had it. And yet, I felt restless. I had spent years hiding, plotting, avenging. Now that the war was over, what was left? I tried to disappear, tried to be normal. It didn't last, because people like me don't just stop. We evolve. Chapter 49. The letter. 3 months passed. Then one morning, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name. Inside, a single sentence. "Justice is not finished." I felt my pulse quicken. Whoever sent this knew me, and they wanted me to play again. Chapter 50. The first target. The letter included a name. Victor Langston, CEO, philanthropist, a public angel with a private darkness, sex trafficking, money laundering, murder. The law had tried and failed to take him down. Now someone wanted me to do it. I smiled. I had no idea who had sent the letter, but I did know one thing. I was about to burn Victor Langston's world to the ground. To be continued. Victor Langston was no ordinary man. He wasn't just powerful, he was insulated. Every crime was committed by someone else, every loose end buried 6 feet under. But men like Langston always had one weakness. They believed they were untouchable, and that's exactly what I would use against him. Chapter 52. The Beatty started where all powerful men get sloppy, with their secrets, his offshore accounts, his fake charities, his hidden investments. But what interested me most was his obsession. Young woman, a journalist named Eleanor Reeves. She had been investigating him for years, writing scathing reports that somehow never gained traction. And yet, Langston never silenced her. Why? Because he was fascinated by her. And that was the crack I needed. Chapter 53. The approach. I found Eleanor in a rundown cafe, staring at her laptop, frustration all over her face. She jumped when I sat across from her. "Who the hell are you?" she asked. I slid a flash drive across the table. "The missing pieces to your story." Her eyes narrowed. "I don't trust strangers," I smirked. "Then you'll love me?" She hesitated. Then, curiosity won. She plugged in the drive. What she saw made her pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. I leaned in. "Now, let's take him down." Chapter 54. The trap is set. Langston was careful, but I was smarter. I manipulated his obsessions, made him feel like he was in control. Eleanor became the bait. A journalist desperate for justice, suddenly willing to talk to him. Langston took it, hook, line, and sinker, one invitation to his estate, one private conversation, and one hidden camera recording everything. Chapter 55. Checkmate. The footage went public. Langston's voice. His confessions. The undeniable truth. The world turned on him overnight. Investigations reopened. Bank accounts frozen. His empire crumbled. And then he ran. Big mistake. Because I was waiting. Chapter 56. The silent witness returns. They found Langston in an abandoned warehouse. He was tied to a chair, a recording of his crimes playing on a loop, no fingerprints. No clues, just one note pinned to his chest. "Justice is never finished." Epilogue. The shadow in the dark. Eleanor disappeared after that. New identity, new life. She had her victory. As for me, I never stopped watching, because the world is full of men like Langston, and someone needs to remind them. I am always watching the end. Months passed since Langston's fall. The world believed that justice had been served, that the great predator had been brought down. But I knew the truth. Justice never ends. I had moved on, hiding in plain sight, watching, waiting. But the shadows had a way of following me, and one evening, when I thought I was alone, the letter arrived again. "You can't hide forever." The words were simple, but the implication was clear. Someone was on to me. Someone had found me. Chapter 58. The ghost in the machine. I began to track the sender. This time, they were better. Smarter. The letter had no return address. The handwriting was nearly identical to my own. Whoever they were sending me a message, but also learning from me. They knew how to cover their tracks. But I was used to being hunted. I let them come, but this time I wouldn't be running. Chapter 59. The man who watched. I followed the clues. A pattern began to emerge. Small, almost invisible details. A hidden camera in a public space. A note slipped under my door. A car that always seemed to follow me. And then I saw him, standing across the street, his face half hidden by a mask, but his eyes were unmistakable. The one person who could truly challenge me, a man who had been watching me. I had a name. Elias. Moore, an enigma. No criminal record, no history, just a shadow. But somehow, he had been tracking my every move for years. Chapter 60. The return of the witness. I didn't confront him immediately. That would have been reckless. Instead, I watched him, learned his patterns, his routines, and then, one night, I met him. He sat at a dark bar, his back to me, pretending not to notice as I slid into the seat next to him. "You're good," I said. "Better than I thought." He didn't flinch. "You taught me well." I narrowed my eyes. "Who are you working for?" He smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "Does it matter?" "Yes," I replied, "because I need to know who I'm dealing with." He leaned forward, his voice a whisper. "You're not the only one who knows how to disappear. You're not the only one who understands the game." I met his gaze. "Then you're either my rival or my replacement." Why not both? Chapter 61. A Dangerous Alliance, Elias. Moore wasn't like me. He wasn't looking for revenge. He wasn't out for justice. He was just curious. Curious about the power I held, the control, the game. And for the first time, I saw something in him I hadn't seen in years. Ambition. He wasn't trying to kill me. He wanted to learn from me. And strangely, I found myself intrigued. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't alone in this dark world. Chapter 62. The choice Elias wanted me to mentor him, to teach him how to play the game as I had. But I was no fool. He wanted to replace me, and I wasn't ready to let go of the shadows yet. So I made him a deal. "I'll teach you," I said. "But remember one thing. There's only room for one in the dark." He grinned, his eyes lighting up with the promise of something dangerous. "Then let the game begin." Chapter 63. The final play-in. The weeks that followed, Elias became more than just a shadow. He became my apprentice. But even as I taught him, I felt the weight of the years bearing down on me. My time in the shadows was coming to an end. Whether I wanted it or not, the game was changing, and the final move was his. One night, after weeks of preparing, Elias made his move. He leaked a set of secrets, dirt on some of the most powerful people in the world, the kind of dirt that would bring down governments, corporations, entire empires. It was chaos, and in the middle of it all, I watched. I watched as Elias took his place at the top, rising from the shadows, taking everything I had taught him and twisting it into his own. And in that moment, I realized I had lost, but for the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I was free. Epilogue. The witness who vanished. The world never knew who Elias Moore was. The world never knew the extent of his influence. But I did. I had taught him everything. And in the end, I had become the ghost. Because in the shadows, there's always room for one more. And I had become the witness who vanished. The end. Years passed, and the world seemed to forget the name Elias Moore. It wasn't that he had vanished entirely. It was that he had mastered the art of being invisible, even to those who would search for him. But I knew. I watched from the shadows, as always. I had stopped playing the game, or so I told myself, but every now and then, I couldn't help but check the whispers, the news, the undercurrents of society. And there, in the cracks of the world's facade, I saw him. Elias had taken everything I had taught him and become something else. His empire wasn't built on destruction, like mine. It was built on something far more dangerous. Influence. A quiet word here. A deal struck there. And soon he had a hand in every major global decision. Governments, corporations, and even criminal organizations. None of them knew his true identity, but all of them were dancing to his tune. He wasn't just untouchable. He was unstoppable. Chapter 65. The letter one evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, the doorbell rang. I hadn't had visitors in years. I opened the door to find an envelope. No return address, just my name scrawled across the front. I knew this game. Inside was a single sentence, written in Elias's familiar hand. "It's time for you to come back." My heart skipped a beat. He knew. He had been watching me all along. Chapter 66. The Mastermind's Game. I spent days contemplating the letter, my mind racing. Was it a trap? Was he trying to lure me back into his game? Or had he finally grown bored of playing alone? I couldn't deny it. Part of me longed for the challenge. I tracked him again, as I always did. The network of whispers had gotten quieter over the years. But I found the right people, and when I finally traced his movements, it led me to a place I never thought I would visit, his home, a place he had carefully built, just as I had once built my own life of isolation. I stood outside his mansion, my breath steady, my pulse calm. It was almost surreal, this moment where I was on the other side. What was it about the game that drew me back? A voice behind me broke my thoughts. "You still think you can win, don't you?" I turned, and there he was, Elias, standing in the shadows, just as I once had. Chapter 67. The Encounter. "I've waited for this moment," I said, stepping forward. "Did you really think I would stay out of the game forever?" Elias smiled, his expression unreadable. "I knew you couldn't resist. It's in your blood. But you're not the one in control anymore." "I never wanted control. I wanted something more. Truth." He raised an eyebrow. "Truth? The truth is there's no such thing. There's only what we make of it." "I used to believe that too," I said, narrowing my eyes. "But now, I think you've forgotten the most important rule in this game. Elias." "And what's that?" "That there's always someone watching," I said. "And that someone will always outplay you in the end." A glint of something dangerous flashed in his eyes. For the first time in years, I saw fear. Chapter 68. The game changes. Elias took a step back. "You really think you can outmaneuver me after all this time?" "I don't need to," I replied. "I've been watching you. I've been waiting for you to slip up, Elias. And I think I've found it." He laughed, but there was an edge to it now. "You can't beat me, old man. You trained me. You made me who I am." "Maybe," I said, my voice colder now. "But I never made you better than me." Without another word, I turned and walked away. For the first time in years, I was ready to disappear again, to leave Elias to his game. But something inside me told me this wasn't the end. No, this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where the rules were about to change once again. Chapter 69. The final play weeks passed, and I stayed in the background, watching as Elias's empire continued to grow. He had made a mistake. He had underestimated me, and now the time had come. I had spent months gathering my own set of cards. Every secret Elias thought he had buried, every deal he made that wasn't as clean as it seemed. The final blow would come, and it would be his. I sent a single message to the right people, a cryptic note that would trigger the dominoes to fall. The people Elias trusted most, the ones who believed in his power, would finally see what he had been hiding. I sat back in my chair, watching as everything he had built began to collapse. It took only hours for his empire to unravel, his connections, his influence. The truth behind every carefully orchestrated move was exposed one by one, and in the final moment, as he stood at the edge of it all, staring into the abyss of his own making, I whispered to the shadows, "This is the end of the game, Elias, the game you thought you would control forever." Epilogue. The ghost returns. The world would never know the full extent of what happened that day. The whispers would fade, and the shadows would reclaim the space they had lost. Elias Moore disappeared without a trace. And as for me, months passed. The world moved on, as it always does. Elias Moore became little more than a footnote in the annals of forgotten history, another man who had played the game too long and lost. The empire he had built crumbled faster than anyone had expected, and with it, his name faded from the headlines. But I knew better than to think it was truly over. People like Elias, people who played the game as he did, didn't just vanish, they simply adapted. I sat in a dimly lit apartment, overlooking a city that had no idea of the storm that was coming. I had spent years in the shadows, but now the game had changed. I had watched, learned, and waited for the right moment. And now, that moment had arrived. In the distance, I saw it. The signal. A simple flash of light, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to me, it was everything. Elias wasn't gone. He had just reinvented himself. Chapter 71. The Message. The message came in the form of a phone call. The number was untraceable, and the voice on the other end was distorted, but I knew immediately who it was. "You thought you could disappear." Elias's voice crackled through the line. "You thought you could outsmart me, but you've only given me a reason to return." I listened, my pulse steady, not reacting to his words. "You took everything from me," he continued. "Now, it's time to take something from you." I remained silent, knowing that silence was the most powerful weapon. "You don't know what's coming," Elias said, his voice now tinged with a dangerous calm. "But I do, and when it hits, you won't have anywhere to hide." The line went dead. Chapter 72. The return of the game. It didn't take long for the signs to appear. Subtle at first, a shift in power within the city's elite circles, a business deal here, a strange financial move there. Whispers started circulating about a new player in the shadows, someone who had been watching, waiting, just like me. Only, this time, they weren't interested in taking the throne. They were interested in destroying it. I could feel it. Elias wasn't just back. He was different. His obsession with control, his meticulous planning, it had all been part of the game. But now it seemed personal. Now it was about revenge, and revenge, as I knew all too well, was a poison that could destroy everything in its path. Chapter 73. The encounter? I didn't wait for him to come to me. Instead, I sought him out. There was no need for games anymore. No need for silence. It was time to face the monster I had helped create. I found him in an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a place that had once been a hub for illegal activities, a place where men like us had conducted our business. The air was thick with dust, the shadows long and heavy. But this time, it wasn't a meeting place. It was a battlefield. Elias stood in the center, his back to me. He didn't turn when I entered, didn't acknowledge my presence. He simply waited. He knew I was coming. "You think you can just come back into my world and everything will be the same?" he asked, his voice cold. "You think you can outplay me again?" I took a step forward. "It's not about outplaying you, Elias. It's about stopping you." He finally turned to face me, his eyes burning with something I had never seen before. Pure, unrelenting rage. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, stepping closer. "This isn't about winning the game anymore. This is about destroying it. And I will burn everything to the ground if I have to, because when everything is ash, no one will be left to tell the story." Chapter 74. The Final Confrontation. The air between us crackled with tension. Elias wasn't just another player in the game. He had become the game. He was the dark reflection of everything I had once been. And now, in this moment, I realized something important. I had spent my life in the shadows, playing the game, moving unseen. But Elias had embraced the darkness in a way I never had. He wasn't afraid of it. He had become it. And now, he was going to burn the world with him. "If you want to destroy it all," I said, my voice steady, "you'll destroy yourself along with it." Elias's smile twisted. "Maybe that's the point." He pulled out a small device from his pocket and pressed a button. The walls of the warehouse hummed to life, and screens lit up around us, showing footage of various locations across the city. High-profile targets, people who had wronged him, people who had wronged me. Every empire needs to fall, Elias said, his tone gleeful. And when they do, you'll be right there with me, watching it all burn. I didn't hesitate. I lunged at him, grabbing the device from his hand and smashing it to the ground. The screens flickered and went dark, but it was too late. The game had already begun. In the final moments, as everything collapsed around us, I realized that Elias's greatest weapon was his willingness to destroy it all. I had always believed in preserving the game, playing by its rules. Months turned into years, and the world moved on. But I knew better than to think the game had ended. It had only shifted, changed its form. Elias Moore may have been gone, but the chaos he had unleashed was a lingering storm that left behind a trail of destruction. People rose to power in his wake, leaders, shadow brokers, manipulators, but none of them had his ruthlessness. None of them could understand the depth of the game the way he had. I, too, had faded into the shadows. I had learned long ago that there was nothing to gain from the spotlight. So I stayed hidden, moving unnoticed, watching the world from the dark corners. But even in silence, even in hiding, the game never truly left me. One evening I received a letter, a plain envelope, the kind I had long since stopped expecting. It had no return address, just a single word on the front. Legacy. I opened it slowly, the paper crinkling under my fingers, the weight of the moment settling into my bones. Inside there was no message, just a name. Isabella. I stared at the name, feeling a chill run down my spine. I knew that name. Isabella. The one person I never thought would be involved in this. Someone I had once trusted. Someone who had been there during the darkest times. Someone whose silence was as heavy as mine. It was a reminder. A summons. A message from someone who had been a part of the game, who had seen it all, and now, just as Elias had before, was calling me back. Chapter 77. The return of the past. I sought her out, following the traces she had left behind. She had disappeared from the world for years, but the trail she left was subtle. A few whispered names, a couple of vague rumors. It didn't take long to find her. She was living in the same city we had once ruled together, but now she was a ghost of her former self. I found her in an old cafe sitting alone by the window. Her face was older, but her eyes, the same piercing eyes, were unchanged. Isabella, I said, my voice cutting through the quiet of the room. She looked up slowly, her gaze cold at first. But when she saw me, something shifted. I wondered when you'd show up, she said quietly, folding her hands in front of her. The game always finds its way back to us, doesn't it? I sat down across from her, keeping my distance, but my mind racing with questions. You're still playing? I asked, trying to hide the surprise in my voice. She smiled, though there was no warmth in it. I never stopped. You taught me well. Her words sent a shiver through me. I had left the game behind, but it seemed the game was never done with me. Why? The message? I asked. Why now? Isabella leaned back, her fingers tapping lightly on the table. Because it's time for you to come back. And I need you to understand something. I waited, knowing that she wouldn't speak until she was ready. The game is changing again, she said. There's someone else. Someone more dangerous than any of us. And this time, they're not playing by the rules. Chapter 78. The new player. I didn't have to ask who she was talking about. I had seen the signs myself. A new player. A new shadow creeping through the cracks of the world. But I had underestimated them. The new figure in the game wasn't like Elias. They didn't seek power for power's sake. They sought control over everything, every decision, every life, every move made by the world's elite. They were not interested in playing the game. They were determined to reshape it. This new figure, Isabella explained, had emerged from the ashes of Elias's downfall, and now they were quietly rising. Their name was a whisper. Their identity was a mystery. But their reach was already far beyond anyone's expectations. I realized then that the game wasn't something I could escape from. The world I had known had evolved, and I could either be a part of it or watch from the sidelines as it swallowed everything I had once known. "You want me to help you stop them?" I asked, already knowing her answer. She didn't need to speak. Her gaze said it all. She wanted me back in the game, but I wasn't sure I was ready for it. Not again. Not after everything I'd lost. Chapter 79. The dark web, we spent weeks tracking the new player. Their actions were subtle at first. Small shifts in the economy, changes in political strategies, sudden mergers and acquisitions of companies that seemed too random to make sense. But as we dug deeper, we realized something far darker was at play. This new player was building an intricate web, a network of influence that stretched across the globe. And unlike us, they had no interest in secrecy. They wanted to control the narrative. The more we learned, the more I understood how deeply entrenched this new player had become. They were playing the game on a level we had never imagined. They had agents everywhere, within governments, corporations, and even in the deepest corners of organized crime. Every time we thought we had found a lead, it vanished, leaving us grasping at nothing. The air was thick with tension as I leaned over the glowing screen in front of me, the map of the world unfolding like a spider's web. Every pin on the map represented a key figure, a point of influence, woven together by the new player. They weren't just a puppet master. They were the entire orchestra, controlling every string, every instrument, and every note of the game. I had underestimated the scale of their reach. This wasn't just some criminal mastermind trying to control a city or even a country. This was someone with the ambition and intellect to reshape the world itself. Isabella stood behind me, watching as the dots blinked in sequence, like the beat of some dark heart that pulsed through the veins of society. "The deeper we go," she said softly, "the more tangled the web becomes. Whoever they are, they've been planning this for years." I nodded, my fingers tracing the outline of several companies and governments, each connected by a network that ran deeper than anything I'd encountered before. We were no longer just dealing with power brokers or shadowy figures. This was something far more insidious. It was as if every facet of the world, from finance to politics to entertainment, had been prepped for this moment. "They've orchestrated everything," I said quietly. "Every major event, every deal, every movement has been part of their design." "And now they're waiting," Isabella added, her voice edged with uncertainty. "Waiting for the moment to make their move." The real question, of course, was how we could stop them. Or if we even could. Chapter 82. The Unseen Hand. The new player was so elusive, so carefully hidden in the shadows, that even I had trouble finding solid proof of their existence. Every lead I followed dissolved into thin air, as though they were a ghost that had mastered the art of leaving no trace. But Isabella was persistent. She had a knack for finding people who knew things, people who were willing to speak if the right price was offered, or if they simply thought they could profit from the chaos. One such contact had led us to a hidden file, buried deep within, a government database, accessible only through a series of back doors that we'd hacked together. What we found inside changed everything. The file was a blueprint for a new world order, a series of calculated moves disguised as global crises, each one feeding into the next, economical, political, even environmental. It was clear now that the new player wasn't interested in just surviving the game. They wanted to control the entire board. I stared at the screen, seeing the intricacies of their plan laid bare in front of me. "They're going to trigger a war," I murmured. "A war on a global scale, but not the kind anyone expects. It's not about countries fighting each other. It's about the collapse of everything." Isabella's eyes narrowed. "What's the end game?" I swallowed hard, my mind racing through the possibilities. Control. Complete, unyielding control. They want the world to collapse into chaos, so they can emerge from the ashes as the sole power, the only voice left in the rubble. A chill ran down my spine. If they succeeded, no one would be left to stop them. Not even me. Chapter 83. The shadows whisper. I didn't know how long I had been sitting there, staring at the plan, but it felt like hours, maybe days. My thoughts were heavy with the weight of what we had discovered. This was more than just a game now. It was a battle for the future of everyone in the world. And then the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was the moment I picked up. "You're too late," the voice on the other end said, a voice I had heard before, a voice I had never forgotten. The new player, the shadow, had finally spoken. "I'm never too late," I replied, my voice steady despite the tension building in my chest. "I've been waiting for you." A cold laugh echoed through the line. "You still think you can stop me? You and your little network of shadows? You've lost, Elias. The game is over." I didn't react. I couldn't afford to. If they thought they had won, then it would be foolish of me to show any weakness. I had learned from Elias that the most dangerous players were the ones who never revealed their hand until it was too late. "Isabella and I will stop you," I said, my words calm. "You may have planned everything, but I know how to destroy plans. I know how to expose the truth, and you don't control the truth." There was a pause, and then the voice on the other end spoke again, quieter now, with a hint of something. "Fear? You don't understand. I am the truth now, and there's no one left to fight." Before I could respond, the line went dead. Chapter 84. The last stand-it was clear now. The final confrontation was coming. The Shadow's move was inevitable, but we had no choice but to play our hand. Isabella and I spent days preparing, gathering our forces, reaching out to old allies, and making sure we had eyes every